My name is Flora Walker, and I'm 58 years old. After teaching French for 3 decades at our local high school, retirement finally gave me the peaceful life I deserved. That is, until my son Thomas called with exciting news about his French fiancée. I was thrilled he found love, especially with someone who spoke the language I'd dedicated my life to teaching. I decided not to mention my fluency right away, thinking it would make a wonderful surprise when the moment felt right. When Thomas described Amélie as perfect in every way, something flickered in my heart. A mother's intuition, perhaps. If you've ever discovered something unexpected about someone in your family, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button to support me. Now let me tell you the story that forever changed my family relationships. After my husband John died in a car accident when Thomas was only 10, raising our son alone became my sole purpose in life. I channeled my grief into providing him with the best upbringing possible on a teacher's salary. French had always been my passion, something I discovered in high school and pursued through college, eventually spending a year studying abroad in Paris. When I returned to the States, I knew teaching the language would be my calling. For 30 years, I taught French at Ridgemont High School, just 15 minutes from our modest suburban home. The students came and went, but my love for sharing the beauty of the language never faded. Through all those years, Thomas remained my constant joy and motivation. Our life wasn't easy after John passed away. The insurance money helped initially, but stretching a single teacher's income meant making sacrifices. I skipped vacations, drove the same car for 15 years, and took on extra tutoring sessions after school hours, all so Thomas could have the opportunities I never had. Despite the financial constraints, Thomas thrived. He was always bright, curious, and determined. I remember helping him with homework at our kitchen table, watching him grow from a sensitive boy into a thoughtful young man. When he received a scholarship to Columbia University, I cried tears of joy and pride. My son would have the education that would set him up for a successful future. After graduating with honors, Thomas landed a position at a prestigious law firm in New York City. His career took off quickly, his natural intelligence and work ethic making him a rising star. I couldn't have been prouder, but as often happens, his busy life meant our time together grew more limited. Phone calls replaced visits, and holidays became the few precious days we could actually spend together. Last Christmas, Thomas apologized for not making it home, explaining he had an important case that couldn't wait. I understood, of course I did, but sitting alone at my table with a small turkey and Christmas music playing softly in the background, I couldn't help feeling the distance between us growing. Then, about 6 months ago, I received an unexpected call from Thomas. His voice brimmed with excitement as he shared the news that he had proposed to his girlfriend Amélie, a French woman he'd been dating for about 8 months. "Mom, she's absolutely perfect," he gushed. "She's beautiful, sophisticated, and brilliant. She works in art acquisition for wealthy clients. You're going to love her." I felt a surge of happiness. My son had found someone special, someone who made him this happy, and the fact that she was French seemed like a lovely connection to my own passion. "That's wonderful, honey. I can't wait to meet her," I said, genuinely thrilled. "There's more," Thomas continued. "We're planning to get married next spring, and Emily's parents are visiting from Paris next month. We'd love to bring them to meet you." "Of course I'd be delighted," I replied, already mentally preparing the guest room and planning what to cook. As Thomas spoke more about Amélie, I noticed how he emphasized her family's status. "They're very well connected in Paris, Mom. Her father is an investment banker, and her mother comes from old money. They have this amazing apartment overlooking the Seine." A tiny seed of concern planted itself in my mind. The way Thomas described Amélie and her family made me wonder if he felt his own background wasn't quite good enough. I quickly dismissed the thought. My son was simply proud of the woman he loved. "When exactly will you be visiting?" I asked. "Next weekend, if that works for you. We'll drive up from the city on Friday evening and stay until Sunday." "Perfect," I said, excitement and a touch of anxiety mixing together. I can't wait to meet the woman who's captured my son's heart. After hanging up, I sat on my living room couch, staring at the faded floral pattern and suddenly seeing my home through different eyes. Would Amélie and her parents find it shabby compared to their Parisian apartment? Would they judge Thomas for coming from such humble beginnings? I pushed these thoughts aside. What mattered was that Thomas was happy and I would welcome his fiancée and her family with open arms. But I did make one decision that evening. I wouldn't immediately reveal my fluency in French. Perhaps I would surprise them at the right moment once we had gotten comfortable with each other. A little surprise for my future daughter-in-law. The week before their arrival, I transformed my house into the warmest, most welcoming home I could manage. I scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, rearranged furniture, and even splurged on new throw pillows for the living room sofa to brighten up the space. The guest bedroom, which had mostly served as storage in recent years, was cleared out and refreshed with clean linens and fresh flowers from my garden. My kitchen became a laboratory of culinary experiments as I planned the perfect menu. I wanted to impress Amélie and her parents with familiar flavors, while also showcasing some American classics. I settled on a French-American fusion menu, a traditional coq au vin as the main dish accompanied by my grandmother's famous cornbread and a garden salad with homemade vinaigrette. For dessert, I would prepare both an apple pie and a selection of French cheeses. As I tested recipes and cleaned, I couldn't help worrying about the impression my modest home would make on Amélie's apparently wealthy family. My house was comfortable and well-maintained, but it was certainly not luxurious. The furniture was mostly practical rather than stylish, and the kitchen appliances were functional but dated. Would they see the charm in its simplicity, or would they silently judge its lack of sophistication? "Stop this right now, Flora," I scolded myself while aggressively kneading pie dough. "This is your home, and you've made a beautiful life here." My thoughts drifted to my years studying French. I had been an exceptional student earning a scholarship for a year abroad in Paris during college. That magical year living with a host family in the 5th arrondissement had polished my accent and immersed me in the culture. Even after returning to the States and becoming a teacher, I maintained my fluency by watching French films, reading French literature, and even having a French pen pal for many years. When I began teaching at Ridgemont High, I organized annual student trips to France until budget cuts ended the program. My students often commented that I spoke French like a native, a compliment I treasured. Now, after 30 years of teaching the language, my skills remained sharp, though I had fewer opportunities to use them since retiring 2 years ago. I debated whether to tell Thomas about my plan to keep my French fluency a secret initially, but decided against it. He had always known I spoke French well, but having never visited France with me, he hadn't witnessed me in full immersion mode. I imagined the delighted surprise on his face when I eventually revealed my ability to converse fluently with his future in-laws. The day before their arrival, my friend Amanda stopped by to help with final preparations and offer moral support. "You look exhausted, Flora," she commented as we arranged flowers in the dining room. "Don't tell me you've been staying up all night cooking and cleaning." I sighed. "I just want everything to be perfect. Thomas hasn't brought anyone home to meet me in years, and now he's engaged to this sophisticated French woman with wealthy parents." Amanda gave me a knowing look. "You're worried they'll look down on you." "Am I that transparent?" I asked with a weak smile. "Only to someone who's known you for 35 years, she replied, adjusting a lily in the arrangement. "Listen to me, Flora. You are a remarkable, accomplished woman who raised an amazing son on your own. If they can't see that it's their loss, not yours." Her words bolstered my confidence, but as she left, the doubts crept back. I stood before my bedroom mirror examining my reflection critically. At 58, my blonde hair was now streaked with silver and laugh lines framed my blue eyes. I was still fit from my daily walks and gardening, but I certainly wasn't the young woman I once was. Would Amélie see me as the unsophisticated American mother-in-law who didn't fit into her cosmopolitan world? I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a navy blue dress that Amanda always said brought out my eyes paired with the pearl earrings John had given me for our 5th anniversary. Simple, elegant, and authentically me. That night, I barely slept running through conversational topics and mentally reviewing French expressions I hadn't used in a while. By morning, I was a bundle of nerves, but also eager to finally meet the woman who would become my daughter-in-law and her family. As the afternoon approached, I put the finishing touches on the house and myself. The dining table was set with my best china and the crystal glasses I'd inherited from my mother. The food was prepared and waiting, needing only final touches before serving. I checked my appearance one last time, applied a fresh coat of lipstick, and took a deep breath. The doorbell rang precisely at 4 o'clock. The moment had arrived. I smoothed my dress, plastered on my warmest smile, and opened the door to meet the people who would become my extended family. "Mom." Thomas's familiar voice filled me with joy as he stepped forward to embrace me. My son looked handsome in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his face glowing with happiness. I hugged him tightly, then pulled back to look at the woman by his side. Amélie was even more stunning than I had imagined. Tall and slender, with glossy chestnut hair falling in perfect waves around her heart-shaped face, she looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her cream-colored designer dress was simple yet undoubtedly expensive, complemented by a delicate gold necklace and matching earrings. She offered a dazzling smile as Thomas introduced us. "Mom, this is Amélie Beaumont, my fiancée. Amélie, this is my mother, Flora Walker." "It is such a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Walker." Amélie said her English perfect with a charmingly soft French accent. She leaned in to kiss both my cheeks. "Thomas has told me so much about you." "Please call me Flora," I replied, genuinely warmed by her greeting. "I've been looking forward to meeting you too." Thomas then gestured to the elegant couple standing behind Amélie, and these are Amélie's parents, Antoine and Gabrielle Beaumont. Antoine was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a suit that even I could tell was custom-made. He had Amélie's warm brown eyes, though his held a certain shrewd assessment as he surveyed my home. Gabrielle was a vision of French elegance, her silver-streaked dark hair styled in a sophisticated bob, her makeup subtle but flawless. Both of them offered polite smiles as they shook my hand. "Enchanté," Antoine said. "Thank you for welcoming us into your home." "We are so pleased to finally meet Thomas's mother." Gabrielle added her accent thicker than her daughter's. Her eyes darted around my living room, taking in the comfortable but modest furnishings. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside to usher them into my home. "I've prepared some refreshments. I hope you had a pleasant drive from New York." As we moved into the living room, I noticed Antoine and Gabrielle exchanging glances, and Amélie's parents began speaking to each other in rapid French. "La maison est plus petite que je ne l'imaginais," Gabrielle murmured to her husband. "The house is smaller than I imagined." "Que peux-tu attendre d'une enseignante à la retraite?" Antoine replied with a slight shrug. "What can you expect from a retired teacher?" My heart sank a little at their words, but I maintained my smile, pretending not to understand. Thomas, oblivious to what was being said, beamed proudly as he guided Amélie to the sofa. "Mom's been a French teacher for years," he told the Beaumonts. "Though I'm afraid I never picked up much beyond bonjour and merci. Too busy with sports and then law books, I guess." I offered everyone drinks a bottle of French wine I'd specially purchased for the occasion, and served the appetizers I'd prepared, mini quiches and a cheese board with fruits. "These look lovely," Amélie complimented, taking a small bite of a quiche. "Did you make these yourself, Flora?" "Yes, I hope you enjoy them. It's not quite Parisian quality, but I did my best," I said with a self-deprecating smile. Amélie turned to her mother and said in French, "Elle essaye tellement d'impressionner. C'est presque pathétique, mais plutôt mignon." She's trying so hard to impress. It's almost pathetic, but rather cute. Gabrielle nodded with a small smile, replying in French, "Au moins elle fait un effort, mais ces quiches sont beaucoup trop salées." At least she's making an effort. But these quiches are much too salty. I felt a stab of disappointment, but continued serving drinks and making small talk in English. Thomas proudly shared stories about his work and their plans for the wedding, while I noticed Amelie's parents continuing to assess my home, exchanging occasional comments in French that were not particularly flattering. "Les meubles semblent venir d'un magasin discount," Antoine commented quietly to his wife. "The furniture looks like it comes from a discount store." "Et regarde ces rideaux démodés," Gabrielle replied. "And look at these outdated curtains." Each comment stung, but I reminded myself that what mattered was Thomas's happiness. If he loved Amélie, I would make every effort to welcome her and her family, regardless of their private opinions about my home or lifestyle. As the evening progressed, I noticed something concerning. Amélie was charming and attentive when speaking directly to Thomas or to me in English, but when she thought I wasn't paying attention or when speaking to her parents in French, her demeanor changed subtly. There was a hint of condescension in her tone, a slight rolling of her eyes when Thomas mentioned something about our family traditions. "Thomas m'a dit que vous aviez l'habitude de faire des macaronis au fromage tous les dimanches," she told her parents with a slight smirk. Tellement américain, non? Thomas told me they used to have macaroni and cheese every Sunday. So American, isn't it? Her parents laughed softly, and I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment. It was true we had enjoyed that simple tradition after church each Sunday. It was Thomas's favorite, and on a teacher's salary, it had been an affordable weekly treat. But Thomas, caught up in the joy of introducing his fiancée to his mother, noticed nothing amiss. He gazed at Amélie with such adoration that it was clear he saw only perfection in her. As I excused myself to check on the main course in the kitchen, I overheard Amélie asking her father in French if he had confirmed their hotel reservations for the night. So they weren't planning to stay in my prepared guest room after all. Another small slight that added to my growing unease. I returned with a smile fixed firmly on my face, determined to continue being the gracious hostess despite the undertones I was detecting. But a growing sense of concern for my son was taking root in my heart. Was the woman he loved truly who she appeared to be? The dining room table was set with my best linens and china, a small vase of fresh-cut flowers from my garden serving as the centerpiece. I'd spent hours preparing the coq au vin, following my old recipe from my time in Paris, hoping to impress my guests with authentic French cuisine. "This looks wonderful, Flora," Amélie said in English as I placed the serving dish on the table. Her smile was perfect, her manners impeccable. "Merci," I replied, using the minimal French I was allowing myself to display. "I hope it meets your standards. It's been a while since I've made this dish." As we all took our seats, Thomas at my right hand and Amélie beside him with her parents across from us, I felt a moment of genuine happiness seeing my son so content. He placed his hand over Amélie's on the table, his eyes shining with love. "Mom's an amazing cook," Thomas told the Beaumonts proudly. "She managed to put me through college on a teacher's salary and still made sure we ate well every night." "That must have been difficult," Antoine responded, his tone polite but somewhat distant. "Raising a child alone while working full-time? It wasn't easy," I acknowledged, "but Thomas was worth every sacrifice. After his father died, he became my whole world." Thomas smiled at me warmly. "Mom gave up a lot for me. She could have remarried, you know. There was this history teacher, Mr. Grayson, who was clearly interested, but Mom always said she needed to focus on giving me stability." I felt my cheeks flush. "Thomas, I'm sure our guests don't need to hear all about our past." "I think it's admirable," Gabrielle said, taking a sip of wine. "Many women would have prioritized finding another husband." There was something in her tone I couldn't quite place, but I smiled and began serving the food. As everyone took their first bites, I watched anxiously for their reactions. "C'est pas mal," Antoine said to his wife in French. "Mais ça manque d'authenticité." "It's not bad, but it lacks authenticity." Gabrielle nodded slightly, then smiled at me. "This is quite good, Flora." "Thank you," I replied, relief washing over me. It's my own adaptation of a recipe I learned years ago. The conversation flowed smoothly as we ate with Thomas doing most of the talking in English, sharing stories about his work and their plans for the future. Amélie added charming anecdotes about how they met at a gallery opening and their first dates. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, but as the wine flowed and everyone grew more comfortable, the parallel conversation in French between Amélie and her parents became more frequent and, to my dismay, increasingly revealing. "Elle a certainement fait de son mieux avec cette maison," Amélie said to her mother with a subtle gesture around the room. "Mais c'est tellement provincial." "She certainly did her best with this house, but it's so provincial." "Au moins, nous n'aurons pas à venir ici souvent," Gabrielle replied. "Une fois que vous serez mariés, Thomas voudra sûrement passer les vacances à Paris plutôt que dans cette petite ville ennuyeuse." "At least, we won't have to come here often. Once you're married, Thomas will surely want to spend holidays in Paris rather than in this boring little town." I kept my expression neutral, cutting a piece of chicken and nodding along as Thomas described their plans to look for a larger apartment in Manhattan after the wedding. "Mom," Thomas said, turning to me with enthusiasm, "Amelie's parents have offered to help us with a down payment on a place in a great neighborhood. Isn't that generous?" "Very generous," I agreed, looking at Antoine and Gabrielle. "That's a wonderful gift." Antoine waved his hand dismissively. "It is nothing. We want Amélie to live comfortably, and real estate is always a good investment." "Et puis," Amélie added to her parents in French with a light laugh, "quand nous divorcerons, je garderai l'appartement, bien sûr." And then, When we divorce, I'll keep the apartment, of course. I nearly choked on my wine, forcing myself to take another sip to cover my shock. Had I heard correctly, Amélie, her father chided softly in French, pas maintenant. Nous en parlerons plus tard. Not now. We'll discuss this later. But Amélie, perhaps emboldened by the wine, continued in rapid French to her parents. Pourquoi attendre le plan assez clair? Je l'épouse. J'obtiens ma carte verte, nous restons mariés quelques années, puis je demande le divorce. Avec un bon avocat, je prendrai au moins la moitié de tout plus une pension alimentaire décente. D'après ce que Thomas m'a dit, il héritera de cette maison un jour et il a des investissements qui valent la peine d'attendre. Why wait? The plan is clear. I marry him, get my green card. We stay married for a few years, then I file for divorce. With a good lawyer, I'll take at least half of everything plus decent alimony. From what Thomas has told me, he'll inherit this house someday, and he has investments that are worth waiting for. My heart felt like it had stopped in my chest. I looked at my son, still blissfully unaware of what was being said, smiling and enjoying his meal. The pain of what I was hearing was almost unbearable. Gabrielle glanced at me quickly, then back to her daughter. Es-tu sûre qu'elle ne comprend pas le français? Are you sure she doesn't understand French? Amélie laughed dismissively. Thomas m'a dit qu'elle l'a enseigné au lycée il y a des années, mais qu'elle n'est jamais allée en France. Son accent quand elle dit « merci » est atroce. Crois-moi, cette vache laide ne comprend rien. Thomas told me she taught it in high school years ago, but she's never been to France. Her accent when she says thank you is atrocious. Trust me, this ugly cow doesn't understand a thing. The vicious words struck me like physical blows, but somehow I maintained my composure, nodding along to whatever Thomas was saying in English, though I could barely hear him through the ringing in my ears. This woman, whom my son adored, was planning to destroy him for financial gain and referring to me in the most degrading terms imaginable. Elle a élevé un fils parfait, cependant. Amélie continued smiling sweetly at Thomas while speaking to her parents. Beau, intelligent, riche, et tellement naïf. Il croit vraiment que je l'aime. She raised a perfect son, though. Handsome, smart, wealthy, and so naive. He truly believes I love him. Her parents chuckled softly, and Antoine raised his glass in a subtle toast to his daughter. À ton succès, ma chérie. To your success, my dear. I excused myself to bring out dessert, needing a moment alone to collect myself. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, hands shaking, fighting back tears. The woman my son wanted to marry was a fraud, a calculating gold digger who saw him only as a path to American citizenship and eventual financial gain. What should I do? Confront her now in front of everyone? That would devastate Thomas. Pull him aside privately. Would he even believe me without proof? I took several deep breaths, steadying myself. I needed to think clearly. Amélie and her parents clearly believed I couldn't understand their conversation. That gave me an advantage, a chance to gather more information before deciding how to protect my son. With my resolve strengthened, I returned to the dining room with the apple pie and cheese board, my smile firmly in place. I hope you saved room for dessert, I said cheerfully, as if my entire world hadn't just been upended. As I served dessert, the weight of what I had heard pressed heavily on my heart. Each smile from Amélie now seemed sinister, her charming laugh hollow and calculated. Yet I maintained my composure, determined to learn more before taking action. The conversation continued in its dual nature, pleasant English exchanges interspersed with French conversations that grew increasingly disturbing. With each new revelation, my pain and anger intensified, but so did my resolve to protect Thomas. Ce gâteau est étonnamment bon, Gabrielle commented to her daughter, sampling my apple pie. This pie is surprisingly good. Oui, mais ne mange pas trop, Amélie replied with a smirk. Nous avons un dîner au restaurant 5 étoiles demain soir. Ça, c'est de la vraie cuisine. Yes, but don't eat too much. We have dinner at a 5-star restaurant tomorrow night. That's real cooking. I served coffee with dessert, my hands trembling slightly as I poured. Thomas, bless his innocent heart, interpreted my unsteadiness as simple nervousness about meeting his future in-laws. Mom's been so excited to meet you all, he said, placing his hand over mine affectionately. She's been cooking for days. It shows, Antoine replied smoothly. Everything has been homey. The way he said Homey made it clear he meant provincial or unsophisticated, but Thomas beamed at what he perceived as a compliment. As Thomas enthusiastically described their wedding plans, I learned more about Amelie's true intentions through her French asides to her parents. J'ai déjà contacté un avocat spécialisé en immigration, she told them quietly. Il a dit que la carte verte conditionnelle sera convertie en carte permanente après 2 ans de mariage. Donc, je dois rester mariée au moins ce temps-là. I've already contacted an immigration lawyer. He said the conditional green card will be converted to a permanent one after 2 years of marriage. So I need to stay married at least that long. Et Thomas ne se doute de rien, her father asked, and Thomas suspects nothing. Amélie cast an adoring glance at my son before responding in French. Absolument rien. Il pense que je suis folle amoureuse de lui. C'est presque trop facile. Absolutely nothing. He thinks I'm madly in love with him. It's almost too easy. Each word was like a knife in my heart. I thought of all my son had been through after losing his father at such a young age, how hard he had worked to build his successful career, and how open and trusting his heart was, despite the early trauma of loss. Now this woman was planning to exploit that trust in the cruelest way possible. Qu'est-ce que tu feras après le divorce? Gabrielle asked, curious about her daughter's plans after the divorce. Je retournerai probablement à Paris avec un joli petit paiement mensuel de mon cher ex-mari. Amélie replied with a confident smile. Peut-être que j'ouvrirai ma propre galerie d'art. Ou peut-être que je trouverai un autre homme riche à épouser. Mais américain cette fois, pas français. Un qui n'a pas de mère à supporter. I'll probably return to Paris with a nice monthly payment from my dear ex-husband. Maybe I'll open my own art gallery. Or maybe I'll find another rich man to marry. But American this time, not French, one who doesn't have a mother to deal with. The three of them laughed softly at that while Thomas, still oblivious, smiled at them curiously. Private joke, Amélie explained to him in English, patting his hand affectionately. About a mutual friend in Paris. Thomas nodded, completely trusting. My son, who had always been perceptive about people, was utterly blind to the deception unfolding right before him. Love had clouded his judgment completely. As the evening progressed, I learned more details of their scheme. Amélie's career in art acquisition was apparently struggling, and her family, despite their appearance of wealth, had financial problems. Antoine's investment firm had suffered losses, and their elegant Parisian apartment was mortgaged to the hilt. They saw Thomas as their financial salvation, and Amélie was their willing instrument. Sa mère me regarde bizarrement, Gabrielle commented at one point, noticing my eyes on her. His mother is looking at me strangely. Elle ne soupçonne rien, Amélie assured her. Elle est juste jalouse que son précieux fils ait choisi une femme française sophistiquée au lieu d'une fille locale ennuyeuse. She doesn't suspect anything. She's just jealous that her precious son has chosen a sophisticated French woman instead of some boring local girl. The casual cruelty of her words made my stomach clench. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made for Thomas, the nights I'd gone to bed hungry to ensure he had enough to eat, the second job I'd taken to pay for his college application fees, the dreams I'd deferred so that his could flourish. I remembered holding him through nights of fever when he was small, cheering at every soccer game, even in pouring rain, staying up until dawn, helping him prepare for exams. All the love I had poured into raising him, only to sit here now and listen to these people plot to exploit and ultimately break his heart for financial gain. The pain turned to resolve hardening in my chest. I would not let them hurt my son, but I needed to be smart about how I intervened. A direct confrontation might backfire if Thomas was too enchanted to believe the truth about his fiancée. I needed irrefutable evidence. As I collected the dessert plates, Amélie made the most shocking statement yet. Speaking quietly in French to her mother while Thomas was engaged in conversation with Antoine about American tax law, she said, Le plus drôle, c'est qu'il parle déjà de vouloir des enfants, comme si j'allais ruiner mon corps pour ça. Je lui dirais que je veux attendre quelques années puis je prétendrai avoir des problèmes de fertilité. D'ici là, je serai prête à divorcer, de toute façon. The funniest thing is that he's already talking about wanting children, as if I would ruin my body for that. I'll tell him I want to wait a few years, then I'll pretend to have fertility issues. By then, I'll be ready for divorce anyway. Gabrielle nodded approvingly at her daughter's foresight, and I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. The depth of deception being planned was staggering. Not only was Amélie planning to break my son's heart and take his money, but she was also planning to deny him the children he had always wanted, stringing him along with false promises and eventual heartbreak. At that moment, looking at my son's trusting face as he engaged earnestly with Antoine, I made my decision. I would not allow this woman to destroy Thomas's future, but I would need to be strategic about how I revealed what I knew. The evening was winding down, and I could see that the emotional toll of maintaining my composure was beginning to show. I needed time to think, to plan my next move carefully. "Well, it's getting late," I said with a warm smile that took all my acting abilities to maintain. "Thomas mentioned you're staying at the Lakeside Hotel tonight." "Yes," Antoine confirmed. "We have reservations there. The drive back to the city would be too long after such a wonderful meal and wine." "We'll come back tomorrow morning before heading back to New York," Thomas added. "Maybe for breakfast, if that's not too much trouble, Mom." "No trouble at all," I assured him, my mind already formulating a plan. "I'll make my special blueberry pancakes." As we moved toward the front door, Amélie linked her arm through Thomas's, leaning her head against his shoulder in a picture-perfect display of affection. But now I saw through the performance, recognized the calculated nature of every loving gesture. "Merci pour cette soirée. Intéressante," Gabrielle said to me in French, clearly not expecting me to understand the subtle insult in her tone. "Thank you for this. Interesting evening." I nodded and smiled, responding only with a simple, "You're welcome," in English. The time for revealing my understanding of French had not yet arrived. My heart was breaking for my son, even as my mind raced with how best to protect him from what was coming. The woman he loved was a fraud, and his entire future happiness was at stake. As they prepared to leave, I knew that the next 24 hours would determine whether I could save my son from making the biggest mistake of his life. As the evening drew to a close, I watched Thomas help Amélie with her coat, his gentle attentiveness bringing tears to my eyes. How could I shatter his world with what I had learned? Yet, how could I not? The Beaumonts exchanged polite goodbyes with me in English while continuing their private comments in French. "Enfin, c'est fini," Gabrielle murmured to her husband. "Demain matin, et puis nous n'aurons plus à revenir dans cette maison déprimante." Finally, it's over. Tomorrow morning, and then we won't have to come back to this depressing house. "Sois patiente," Antoine replied. "Une fois qu'ils seront mariés, nous verrons Thomas chez nous, pas ici. Be patient. Once they're married, we'll see Thomas at our home, not here." Amélie joined their conversation, speaking quietly so Thomas wouldn't hear as he gathered their things. "J'ai hâte de quitter cet endroit. La mer est aussi ennuyeuse que la maison." I can't wait to leave this place. The mother is as boring as the house. I busied myself with collecting the last wine glasses from the living room, giving myself a moment to control my emotions. When I returned to the entryway, Thomas was checking his phone. "The hotel confirmed our reservation," he told Amélie. "It's only about 15 minutes from here." "Parfait," she responded, then quickly switched to English. "I mean, perfect. I'm getting so tired." "We should get going," Antoine suggested, checking his watch. "It's been a long day." Thomas turned to me with a broad smile. "Thanks for everything, Mom. Dinner was amazing." He enveloped me in a warm hug, and I held him, perhaps a bit longer than usual, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the same shampoo he'd used since college. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart." I said the words catching slightly in my throat. I meant them, but not in the way he thought. I hugged Gabrielle next, who returned the gesture stiffly, then Antoine, whose embrace was equally formal. Finally, I turned to Amélie. As I leaned in to embrace my future daughter-in-law, a sudden clarity washed over me. This moment right now was my opportunity. "À bientôt, Amélie," I whispered in her ear, my French pronunciation perfect after decades of practice. She pulled back slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but she quickly masked it with a smile, clearly believing she had misheard. The four of them stepped out onto my porch, and I followed to wave goodbye. Thomas was busy helping his future in-laws into the car, providing me with one last moment with Amélie. "I've so enjoyed meeting you all," I said in clear, flawless French. "This evening has been very illuminating. I'm looking forward to our conversation tomorrow morning." Emily froze her face, draining of color. She stared at me in horrified disbelief, her mouth opening slightly, but no sound emerging. "Amelie, everything okay?" Thomas called from the car. She turned to him, composing her features into a smile so quickly it was almost impressive. "Yes, coming," she replied in English, then looked back at me with panic in her eyes. I simply smiled serenely and switched back to English. "Drive safely. See you all in the morning for breakfast." Gabrielle and Antoine, who had been settling into the back seat, hadn't witnessed our exchange, but as Amelie walked robotically to the passenger door, I saw her lean in and whisper urgently to her mother. Gabrielle's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine with shock and dawning horror. Thomas, completely oblivious to the sudden tension, waved cheerfully as he got into the driver's seat. "Good night, Mom. Love you. Love you too, honey," I called back, maintaining my pleasant expression until they pulled out of the driveway. As soon as the car disappeared down the street, I closed my front door and collapsed against it, finally allowing the tears I'd been holding back all evening to flow freely. My body shook with the force of my sobs, years of teaching experience allowing me to understand every cruel word, every despicable plan they had discussed in front of me. My phone began buzzing almost immediately with text messages. I wiped my eyes and looked at the screen. 3 messages from Thomas asking if I liked Amelie and her parents, saying how happy he was that the evening had gone so well. Then came a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Amelie." I put the phone down without responding. Let them stew overnight, wondering exactly how much I had heard and understood. Let them imagine what I might do with that information. I made myself a strong cup of tea and sat in my kitchen, replaying the evening in my mind and considering my options. Should I play them the recording I had secretly made of the dinner conversation? Yes. I had discreetly placed my phone on the sideboard, recording app running when I'd first noticed their French conversations turning suspicious. Old school teacher instincts never really fade when it comes to catching people who think they're being clever. Or should I simply tell Thomas what I had heard and let him confront Amelie directly? Would he believe me without proof? Their relationship was relatively new, but the intensity of his feelings was clear. Love could blind even the most intelligent people to obvious deception. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Amelie. "Please, we should discuss this privately before you talk to Thomas. There's been a misunderstanding." I almost laughed at the audacity. A misunderstanding I had understood perfectly well when she called me an ugly cow and detailed her plans to marry my son for a green card, divorce him, and take his money. More messages followed, increasingly desperate, from both Amelie and her mother. I turned off my phone. I needed a clear head to decide my next steps, and their panic gave me a small measure of satisfaction after the pain they had inflicted. I slept fitfully that night, waking several times from dreams of Thomas's heartbroken face. By morning, I had made my decision. I would not ambush my son in front of the Beaumonts. He deserved to hear the truth privately, with dignity and with evidence that would leave no room for doubt. I turned my phone back on to find 27 missed calls and numerous text messages. Most were from Amelie and her parents, but there were also 2 from Thomas, sent late in the night saying Amelie wasn't feeling well and they might be a bit late for breakfast. I could only imagine the frantic discussions happening in those hotel rooms, the scrambling to create explanations, perhaps even plans to cut their visit short and flee back to New York. But I knew Thomas would come, if only to make excuses for their early departure. I set about making the promised blueberry pancakes, finding a strange calm in the familiar routine of mixing batter and heating the griddle. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same strength I had found to raise my son alone, to build a life for us from the shattered pieces left after John's death. Just after 9, I heard a car in my driveway. Looking out the kitchen window, I saw Thomas getting out alone. No Amelie, no Beaumonts. Perhaps that was for the best. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and prepared to tell my only child that the woman he loved had been planning to break his heart all along. Thomas stood on my porch looking exhausted, his usual immaculate appearance disheveled. His hair was uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept, and he wore the same clothes from the previous evening, now wrinkled from a restless night. "Thomas," I said softly, opening the door. "Come in." He stepped inside wordlessly, then stood in the entryway looking lost. I gently guided him to the kitchen where the smell of pancakes and fresh coffee filled the air. He sat heavily at the table, staring at his hands. "Where are Amélie and her parents?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "They're gone," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Checked out of the hotel at dawn. They're driving back to New York." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. "Mom, what happened last night?" Amélie came back to the hotel completely panicked, talking to her parents in French so fast I couldn't understand a word. When I asked what was wrong, she just said they needed to leave first thing in the morning. Something about a family emergency in Paris. I poured him a cup of coffee and sat across from him, reaching out to take his hands in mine. "Thomas, there's something I need to tell you, and it's going to be difficult to hear." "It's about what you said to Amélie when we were leaving, isn't it?" he asked. "She wouldn't tell me exactly what you said, but I gathered you spoke to her in French." I nodded slowly. "Yes. What I need to explain is why I did that and what happened during dinner that led to that moment." Thomas's brow furrowed. "I don't understand. I know you speak some French from teaching it all those years, but Amélie said you spoke to her like a native. She seemed scared." "She had reason to be," I said gently. "Thomas, I've never told you much about my time in Paris during college, but I lived there for a year. I'm fluent in French. I have been for most of my adult life." He blinked in surprise. "Really? Why didn't you ever mention that? I did honey when you were younger, but it never seemed important as you grew up, especially since you never showed much interest in learning the language yourself." I squeezed his hands. "Last night, I didn't immediately reveal my fluency because I thought it might be a nice surprise later in the evening. But as dinner progressed, I realized that Amélie and her parents were having private conversations in French, assuming I couldn't understand." Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What were they saying?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment that would change everything for him. "They were saying terrible things, Thomas. About me, about my home, but more importantly about their intentions toward you." I watched his face carefully as I continued. "Amélie told her parents that she was only marrying you to get a green card and eventually divorce you for your money. She called me ugly names and laughed about how naive you were to believe she loved you." Thomas jerked his hands away from mine, his face flushing with anger. "That's not possible. You must have misunderstood. Amélie loves me. We're planning our future together." I had expected this reaction. The truth was too painful, too contrary to everything he believed about the woman he loved. "I wish I had misunderstood, sweetheart, but I didn't." "Prove it," he demanded, his voice hard with disbelief. "If what you're saying is true, prove it." I reached for my phone, which I'd placed on the counter. I recorded parts of the conversation. His eyes widened in shock. "You recorded our dinner. Why would you do that?" "I started recording after I heard the first few concerning comments," I explained. "Teacher's instinct, I suppose. I wanted to have evidence of what I was hearing in case exactly this happened, I didn't need to say." I opened the recording app and placed the phone between us on the table. "Before I play this, Thomas, I want you to know how sorry I am. I never wanted to hurt you. I only want to protect you." He stared at the phone, then looked back at me, conflicting emotions warring on his face. Finally, he nodded. "Play it." I pressed play, and Amélie's voice filled the kitchen, speaking in French. "Je l'épouse, j'obtiens ma carte verte, nous restons mariés quelques années, puis je demande le divorce. Avec un bon avocat, je prendrai au moins la moitié de tout." As the recording continued playing snippets of the most damning conversations, Thomas's face went through a series of transformations. Disbelief gave way to shock, then pain, and finally, a quiet, devastating anger. By the time I stopped the recording, he was ashen, his hands trembling slightly. "She called you," he began, unable to complete the sentence. "That doesn't matter," I said quickly. "What matters is what she planned to do to you." Thomas stood abruptly, turning away from me to stare out the kitchen window. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "I confronted her last night," he said after a long silence. "After your comment in French. I asked her what was going on. She denied everything, said you must have misunderstood their private jokes." He turned back to face me, his expression haunted. But this morning, when I pressed her again, she finally admitted some of it. Not all, not the worst parts. She claimed she really did love me, but had exaggerated to impress her parents, that they expected her to be calculating and she was just playing a role for them. And did you believe her? I asked gently. He shook his head slowly. I wanted to. God, Mom. I wanted to believe her so badly, but the way she looked at me when I questioned her, it wasn't the look of someone who'd been caught exaggerating. It was the look of someone whose entire facade had crumbled. I stood and moved to him, pulling him into a hug the way I used to when he was a little boy with a skinned knee or a broken toy. He resisted for just a moment, then collapsed against me, his tall frame bent to rest his head on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, I whispered, holding him as his body shook with silent sobs. I'm so sorry she wasn't who you thought she was. We stood like that for several minutes, the pancakes forgotten on the counter. Eventually, Thomas straightened and wiped roughly at his eyes. I feel like such a fool, he said bitterly. I was completely blind. All those business trips she took, the mysterious phone calls, the way she never wanted me to meet her friends in New York. There were signs all along. Love makes us want to see the best in people, I told him. There's no shame in that. He gave a humorless laugh. Did you know she asked about my life insurance policy last month? Said we should update the beneficiaries once we were married? I thought she was just being practical. The casual cruelty of it made my heart ache for him even more. What are you going to do now? Thomas took a deep breath, composing himself. End it, obviously. She's been texting me nonstop since we left your house this morning. I haven't responded yet. Take your time, I advised. Make sure you protect yourself legally if needed. He nodded, some of his professional demeanor returning. I'll talk to a colleague who specializes in prenuptial agreements. Make sure there are no loopholes she can exploit, even from our engagement. I moved back to the stove, needing something to do with my hands. Are you hungry? The pancakes are still warm. Actually, I am, he admitted, sitting back at the table. I couldn't eat anything at the hotel. Too upset. I placed a stack of blueberry pancakes in front of him, along with maple syrup and butter, just as I had done countless times throughout his childhood. As he began to eat, some color returned to his face. How did you know? He asked between bites. Even before you understood what they were saying in French. You seemed wary of her from the beginning. I sat across from him, with my own plate. Mother's intuition, perhaps. Something felt rehearsed about her. Too perfect, too calculated to please. Real relationships have rough edges, imperfections. Thomas was quiet for a moment, contemplating this. Thank you, he finally said, for protecting me even when I couldn't see that I needed protection. That's what mothers do, I replied simply. We see what our children sometimes can't, because we're looking with eyes that have loved them their entire lives. As we finished breakfast, Thomas seemed more centered, the initial shock giving way to resolute calm. I need to go back to the city today, he said. Deal with this face to face, end things properly. I nodded, understanding his need for closure. You'll get through this, Thomas. It will hurt for a while, but you're strong. You always have been. He helped me clear the dishes, and as we worked side by side in comfortable silence, I felt a renewed appreciation for our bond. Amélie had tried to come between us to isolate Thomas from me as part of her scheme, but in the end, she had only strengthened our connection. Before he left, Thomas hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom. I don't say that enough. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. I watched from the porch as he drove away, my heart heavy with his pain, but also filled with profound gratitude that I had been able to protect him from a far worse fate. The coming weeks would be difficult for him, but he would heal, and I would be there every step of the way, just as I had been since the day he was born. The aftermath of that fateful dinner unfolded over several painful months. Thomas called me the evening after he left my house, his voice drained but resolute. He had confronted Amélie with the recording, leaving no room for further denials or manipulations. She had broken down, alternating between tearful apologies and bitter accusations, claiming I had misinterpreted her words or manipulated the recording somehow. It was ugly, Mom, he confessed. When she realized I wasn't backing down, she showed her true colors completely. All the sweetness disappeared. She actually demanded I return the engagement ring, saying it was a family heirloom. Was it? I asked. He gave a humorless laugh. No, we bought it together at Tiffany's 3 months ago. I have the receipt to prove it. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions for Thomas. He threw himself into work, often staying at the office until midnight. Sometimes he called me late at night, his voice thick with pain or anger, needing to talk through his feelings. Other times he went days without communicating, processing his grief in solitude. I worried about him, constantly remembering how he had retreated into himself after his father died, building walls that took years to break down. I suggested therapy, which he initially resisted, but eventually agreed to try. It helped, he said, to have an objective perspective on what had happened and why he had been so thoroughly deceived. For my part, I experienced a complex mix of emotions. Relief that my son had been spared a disastrous marriage, warred with anger at Amélie and her parents for the pain they had caused. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if I could have handled things differently, revealed the truth more gently, or found a way to spare Thomas some of the heartbreak. But in my more rational moments, I knew there had been no painless way to expose such a calculated deception. About 2 months after the breakup, Thomas drove up for the weekend. It was the first time he had visited since that morning of revelation, and I was heartened to see him looking more like himself, the haunted expression gradually fading from his eyes. We sat on the back porch drinking lemonade, the summer heat tempered by a gentle breeze. Thomas had been quiet, contemplative, but not in the raw, wounded way of our earlier conversations. I keep thinking about what you said that morning, he finally spoke, about how you saw something in Amélie that I missed because you were looking with eyes that had loved me my entire life. I nodded, remembering the moment. It made me realize how much I've taken that love for granted, he continued. After Dad died, you restructured your entire life around giving me stability and opportunities. You never complained, never made me feel like a burden, even though it must have been so hard. You were never a burden, Thomas, I assured him. You were my anchor in a storm. Focusing on giving you a good life helped me survive losing your father. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what I really want in a relationship in life. Amélie represented something shiny and impressive, I guess. Dating her made me feel like I had somehow made it, achieved some kind of status. That's understandable, I said. We all want to feel successful, admired. But it was empty, he replied. All surface, no substance. What I want now, what I'm looking for, is something real. Someone who sees me for who I am, not what I can provide or how I look on paper. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You'll find that person, honey, when you're ready. The healing process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when Thomas would discover some new aspect of Amélie's deception, like credit card charges for hotel rooms on dates when she had claimed to be visiting her fictitious sick aunt. Each revelation would reopen the wound, but eventually the pain began to dull. We grew closer through the ordeal. Thomas called more regularly, visited more frequently. We had deeper conversations than we'd had in years, discussing his father, his childhood, his hopes for the future. It was as if the near disaster of his engagement had reminded him of what truly mattered in life. As for me, I found an unexpected liberation in the aftermath. For years, I had defined myself primarily as Thomas's mother, putting his needs before my own. With him now safely navigating adulthood, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had set aside. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a local literacy program, and even began dating again, tentatively, exploring the possibility of companionship in my later years. Almost a year to the day after the infamous dinner, Thomas called with news that made my heart sing. He had met someone, a fellow lawyer named Julia, who worked for a nonprofit providing legal aid to immigrants. They had been dating for a few months, taking things slowly. I'd like to bring her to meet you next weekend, he said, a nervous edge to his voice, if that's okay with you. Of course it is, I replied, touched by his consideration. I'd love to meet her. She's different, Mom, he continued. Grounded, genuine. She laughs at my bad jokes and calls me out when I'm being stubborn, and she knows all about what happened with Amélie. I told her everything. When they arrived the following Saturday, I knew immediately that Thomas had found something real this time. Julia was warm and unpretentious with an easy laugh and intelligent eyes. She brought me a potted orchid rather than cut flowers, so you can enjoy it longer, and helped with dinner preparations without being asked. Most telling was the way she looked at Thomas, not with calculation or performance, but with authentic affection and respect. After they left on Sunday, Thomas texted me, "What did you think?" I replied honestly, "I think she sees you with eyes that really want to know you. That's a good start." Now, as I sit at my kitchen table reflecting on the journey of the past 18 months, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. What could have been a devastating chapter in my son's life became instead a powerful lesson, a redirection toward authenticity and deeper connection. The pain Amelie caused was real but temporary. Had her deception succeeded, the damage would have been far more lasting and destructive. I shudder to think of Thomas, trapped in a loveless marriage, gradually discovering the truth over years rather than months, perhaps, after children were involved or his assets were irretrievably entangled with hers. Sometimes when I teach my adult education French class at the community center, I think about how a lifetime of loving a language I never expected would one day protect someone I love. Life weaves connections in mysterious ways, bringing our past and present together at crucial moments. If there's a lesson in all of this, perhaps it's about trusting our instincts, especially when they come from a place of genuine care. It's about recognizing that sometimes painful truths are necessary gifts. And it's about understanding that our greatest protection against deception is not suspicion, but rather surrounding ourselves with people who love us for who we truly are, not what we can provide. Sometimes I wonder if Amelie ever thinks about us, if she regrets what she attempted or has simply moved on to her next target. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that Thomas is healing, growing, and opening himself to authentic connection once more. As mothers, we can't protect our children from every hurt, but sometimes we're in exactly the right place at exactly the right time with exactly the right knowledge to spare them from the worst of life's cruelties. And for that, I will always be grateful. Have you ever had a moment when understanding another language revealed something important, or when your intuition about someone turned out to be right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. Remember, sometimes the most painful revelations lead us to our most authentic paths. Thank you for listening, and may you always have people in your life who see you with eyes of true love.